Welcome back to another episode of Automotive Insight. Today's repair is a 2020 Honda Accord 1.5 liter turbocharged. Customer states check engine light. The code's a P2563. That is a wastegate position sensor circuit code, intermittent or performance. So before we get started, we're going to drain our coolant. On the center part of the radiator is the drain plug. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to work on removing this upper intake tube. We're going to do this clamp and that one. These are 5.5 millimeters. We've got two 10 millimeter bolts, and we'll remove these hose clamps. So we can actually probably leave those on there, leave those little hoses on there. We can just flip that hose out of the way. Next, we're going to disconnect our AF sensor. And then we're going to remove this bracket. It is a 12 millimeter bolt underneath. Next, we'll remove the AF sensor. Disconnect the wastegate, and we'll undo this bracket here. I was having a hard time getting that off. We'll just take this 10 millimeter bolt out. So we're going to remove the washer jug filler neck. There's a plastic tab. We'll move our coolant reservoir. That can pull straight up. We'll undo the hose from this bracket. We're just going to take that and set it off to the side. Okay, we're going to remove this heat shield. There's three 12 millimeter bolts. Okay, next we're going to work on this side heat shield. There's three 12 millimeter bolts. I'm going to work on taking off these hoses, and there's two 10 millimeter bolts. I'm going to remove the coolant reservoir bracket. There's two 10 millimeter bolts. I'm going to remove the hard plastic elbow. There's a 12 millimeter nut and a 12 millimeter bolt. We'll remove this upper hose. Okay, next we're going to remove the O2 sensor bracket. It's a 10 millimeter. We're going to disconnect the O2 sensor. There's two bolts and two nuts. We want to disconnect the catalytic converter from the turbocharger. We're going to move the lower shield. They got 4 flathead little screws and 2 Phillips head screws, and honestly the flathead fits just fine. Next, we're going to work on removing the flex piping to the catalytic converter. There's 3 14mm bolts. There are two brackets. We're just going to loosen up the one on the engine and transmission. Then we'll remove the ones on the catalytic converter. Okay, so we're going to disconnect the oil return line from the turbocharger itself. That line's pretty stiff. I imagine that could be pretty hard to remove, so we're going to do the 10mm bolts. Okay, we're going to remove the oil feed line. It's a 10mm. The charge piping, the hose clamp is a 10mm. Disconnect the coolant lines from the side of the turbo. They're held on by 2 10mm nuts. We're going to clamp off our coolant lines. There's one up here, and then the second one. Be careful when you move the coolant lines that it's not dripping into your turbo piping down below. You can just kind of tuck that out of the way. Okay, so we're going to work on disconnecting the turbo from the cylinder head. They are 14mm bolts, or there's 2 nuts and 2 bolts. Okay, so directly underneath the turbo housing, there is a bracket. It is a 14mm. Okay, so we will need to separate this line to get the turbo out because it is trapped by the metal vacuum lines. So we'll take these clamps off. So we'll take this hose off. Alright, we got our new turbocharger. We're going to swap over some hoses. So we're not going to tighten down the oil feed line yet. We do have a new gasket for the banjo bolt for the sealing washers, and we do have a new gasket for where it mounts to the block. That is a screen, a little filter for the turbo, and it's an O-ring as well. So, but we're going to just leave that just a little loose until we get that bolted, and then we'll tighten those all down. Okay, we got everything set up. So we swapped everything over to the new turbo, and we're going to work this back in. I do have a new gasket here. Basically, I've got all new gaskets for the coolant lines and the oil lines. Bolt up the oil feed line to the block. Put a little anti-seize. We'll go ahead and reattach the bracket bolt. We're going to leave that loose. We'll put in our lower manifold bolt. Okay, we'll go ahead and tighten down our oil feed line on the block. We'll go ahead and tighten that down. Go ahead and reroute the coolant line. We'll put our coolant bracket back on. Okay, I got a new gasket for our coolant pipes. Put our other coolant hose on. We'll go ahead and do our oil return. Okay, we'll tighten down our lower turbo bracket. We can put our charge piping back on. Okay, we'll put our catalytic converter back on. We're just going to put our flange nuts on loosely, and we'll put our brackets on. We'll put our O2 sensor harness bracket back on. Plug your O2 sensor in. Okay, we can put our heat shield on. Okay, we'll install the upper heat shield. We'll reinstall our AF sensor. We'll reinstall our turbo pipe, and there is a new O-ring here. Connect our vacuum lines. Okay, we'll reattach our vacuum line brackets. Okay, we'll reattach our wastegate harness. Okay, we'll do the reservoir bracket. Okay, we'll reinstall the upper intake tube. Okay, we're going to tighten up our lower exhaust bolts. The reason I left these loose until we got the top tightened is when it comes to exhaust stuff, I sort of like to piece it together and have everything started because exhaust stuff tends to bind. There is a gasket in between there if you want to replace it. Okay, we'll put our lower engine cover back on. Top off the coolant. So we're going to do the exact same test as last time and see where it ends up. So our target lift has changed and our actual lift has changed. So everything's a lot closer than what it was before replacing it. So this confirms our fix. Well, that's going to wrap up the 2020 Accord. This car has about 107,000 miles on it. The turbocharger itself, the wastegate was filled electronically. The old turbo did have a little bit of shaft play in it, so it was a good idea to obviously do the whole assembly. I looked and I didn't find the wastegate separate, so we got one from the dealership, a new turbo from the dealership that came with the whole assembly. Labor calls for about 4 to 5 hours to do this. The turbo lists for about $910. Anyway, I hope this video helps. I may not have all your answers. Hopefully I had some. That being said, I'll see you on the next one.
Said I'll pick you up at 8. You probably won't be awake. Call yourself an Uber, babe. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait.
There goes my screwdriver.